So, hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Think Your Way to an Epic Life. And I am pleased to bring Ken Blackman to us today. Ken is a relationship expert, and he specifically is a relationship between men and women in a marriage type situation, or I'm sure a cohabitation situation. Either way, there's no judgment from anyone on that. But this is such a unique show from what I normally bring. And I just want to warn you, if your kids are in the car, this might not be the podcast for you to listen to right now, because we really do talk about the reality of marriage and the reality of what goes on inside of a marriage. So might want to save this one for later on when the kids are not with you, but you definitely should listen to this. It's very interesting, very informative, and we're going to have some fun. So the big question right off the top of my head, Ken, of course, is what got you into being so curious about relationships?
Yeah. So I was a software engineer and I had terrible skills with relationships and with the opposite sex, and was nerdy and shy and codependent and misogynistic and all the ways you can be wrong. I just didn't know what I was doing, and lonely and unhappy. Do you know what I mean? Like I was pretty successful in my career, so there was a lot in my life that was going well, but this one area of my life, like, I was clueless. And so I needed help myself. And so I dove into, like, what are the different modalities? I started reading books. I got therapy. I worked with coaches and learned, I just learned a lot. And it was so transformative for me to be able to actually have a healthy relationship with a woman and actually know what that means, that I was like, oh, this is the work I want to do for other people. And I did some study with my mentors, the people who had coached and trained me, and then started working with people, and I never looked back. Like, this is the work that I enjoy doing.
So back to the good stuff, the stuff people got here for, is you claim to be able to help people have much better relationships. What are some simple starting steps someone can do if they're already in a marriage and it's just okay?
In a typical conversation that I would have with someone, I would be asking questions of them for about an hour or a couple hours before I would even take a shot at giving advice. I'm going to answer your question, but I just want to preface by saying, I will talk to both people. I will talk to this person until I can really see the world through their eyes. Then I'll talk to this person until I really see the world through their eyes. And then I'll say, here's what I think. Does this sound right to you? This is what you guys see. Here's what I see as possible for you. How does that sound? And then I can say, if you like that vision, then here's what I think would need to change in the way that you guys relate with each other. So just to preface, like, it's a big question, and one that I usually do a lot of like honing in on the specifics before I would give an answer. That said, there are some basic things that come up a lot. I don't know if these are things that will apply to your audience or not, but I'll just, like, off the top of my head, it can happen that when they get first of all, it's really important to be able to talk about anything. So, for example, in my relationship, there aren't any, like, you get a landmine where a topic is such a hot topic that you end up, you never really get through it. You just learn to kind of walk around it. Those are the beginning of the end of the relationship. So to be able to actually risk saying things that are uncomfortable and actually talk all the way through some of the issues, is first and foremost. If you can't do that, then there isn't a lot of hope. And it's a big ask. It's a big ask for people to talk about stuff, Like, let's say hypothetically, their sex life is okay. It's not great. And the typical example, the typical way that plays out, it's not always this way, but he comes to me and he says, I wish we were having more sex. And then I talk to her and she says, I wish we were having better sex. And so that is not uncommon for that combination to be there. And then I'll ask her, like, what, I'll start to ask them if they're willing to be honest and be kind of, talk about some intimate stuff. They'll start to tell me, and I'll realize the degree to which the sex is actually better for him than it is for her. And that she hasn't been talking about that. And maybe she's been putting on a little bit of a show. And now there's the uncomfortable conversation where she has to say, I haven't been as honest with you about my experience when we're having sex. And I've kind of been like, because I know you like it, I've been kind of giving you the impression that you're better in bed than you actually are. Now, believe me, that's going to sting when he hears it. Sure. So are we able to actually get to a place where we can have a conversation about something that intimate and that like vulnerable and tender? Both people are now actually like, this could be a very painful conversation. But once the door is open, if we can get to a place where he gets past the sting of his ego and he actually is like, you know what, 49% I'm hurt and I'm angry and blah, blah, blah. But 51%, I actually want to know what would have you enjoy sex for real. And she's like, I've been so oriented towards my sex being for other people that it's really, really hard for me to shift into what it would be like for sex to be for me. Like, I'm just kind of pulling this out of the air. I have no idea if this applies, if this is useful for your audience. I'm taking it as an example of a difficult conversation to have. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And all the skills that they will learn along the way of having that conversation and getting all the way to the other side where maybe they're feeling closer to each other. Maybe they have some new ideas about how to move forward where the sex can actually start to get better than it's been, So that's one thing. You have to be able to talk about difficult topics. I don't know where that example came from, but that was really the point of that whole thing.
No, it's a great flow. So how do you as a therapist, if they haven't as a married couple been able to discuss this on their own,
yeah,
how do you come in and make them both feel safe and comfortable enough to go there?
There's a couple pieces to it. First, I tend to have a knack, just personality-wise, of being able to talk about difficult things in a way that isn't emotionally charged. So there's something about not that they can't do this on their own. Like couples could do this on their own, but there's something about my presence that makes it possible for them to talk about emotionally charged topic in a way that is emotionally like flat. It's just like I have a grounding presence. So that's a piece of it. It's just something that I developed over time. But the other piece is there's this idea of nonviolent communication. I am not a fan of nonviolent communication. I believe that first of all, you have to be able to actually feel the full range of emotions that you're feeling. So if someone's angry, there can be a tendency to first there's the anger itself. I'm really pissed off about this thing. Then there's the I shouldn't be feeling this feeling because it's going to cause wreckage. Last time I got angry, we got into a huge fight. Things were said that were that we regretted later. And so my anger is bad and I have to suppress it. And then I have to try and be diplomatic and kind of talk in this very, So I throw all of that out the window. The main thing to learn is the difference between anger and being contemptuous, the difference between being angry and being vindictive, the difference between being angry and being just plain old mean. Do you know what I mean? And so I start to have to create this gap between the emotion that they're feeling and their tendency to just lash out when they're angry. So all of a sudden they have this freedom to actually be angry and express their anger while still holding high regard for their partner. Now, this is something actually that I learned from my wife. She has beautiful languaging around this. I experienced something with her that I had never experienced before, which is she's able to be angry and still talk to me in a place where she's holding me in high regard. And this is something that's very important to her. She made a vow to herself that she would be protective of her high regard for me. And so I have this experience of her being genuinely angry, like rage, like sometimes. Like something is upsetting enough that she's like ragefully angry. And giving herself the space to feel that and like raise her voice and still talk to me like she has high regard for the person that she's talking to. That is an amazing skill to have. And, So I believe that you should be able to feel the full range of emotions. You should be able to express the full range of emotions and still hold each other in high enough regard that you can actually connect and be and have the conversation that needs to be had. Does that make sense?
Got you, for sure. And everybody resonates differently with different things. So you in your work, you talk a lot about women want more love, men want more sex, but you disagree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's think about this. I love this topic. This is one of my favorite topics. So that's the typical thing that we believe is true. Like women want love and men want sex. And maybe even we believe that women will kind of barter sex to get the love that they want, and men will kind of like barter the love in order to get the sex that they want. And so here's some things to think about as we think about that. First of all, when we turn to technology, like the sex toys and the stuff that's out there, the technology that women turn to most often is a vibrator. And the technology that men turn to most often is porn. And if men do use a sex toy, it'll be like the whole thing where there's dolls now, right? Or they'll hire a sex worker or something. So what is it about all those things that, like, what can we conclude from men? Like what men is, whether it's porn or dolls or a sex, a sex worker, what they are hungry for in those situations is another person to have the experience with. So they're either watching and enjoying other people's enjoyment, or they're creating a false or a real other human being to have the experience with. Because men's bodies aren't that complicated to operate. Like if it was just about the orgasm, a guy he would just do it himself. But what's missing from that experience is, no, I want to co-experience with another human being. I even want to watch other people have this experience. I want some sort of empathetic co-experiencing with another human being, or co-experiencing another human being's their pleasure. And so they did this study where they were watching men and women watch porn, and they followed the men's gaze as they watched the porn. And what were men paying attention to the most? Where was their gaze the most? It was on the female performer's face. So obviously there's a physical component, a physical somatic enjoyment component. But what men hunger for, what they want, what the missing ingredient for them is co-experiencing with another human being. Okay. And if you look at women use a vibrator. Well, what's a vibrator? That like when that's where they spend their money. And what that says is they want like somatic pleasure that they get shortchanged on in sex. So many women tell me that it's easier for them to produce pleasurable sensation in their partner's body than for them to feel it in their own body. And so there's this, so like if it's easy, it's not that hard for the typical woman to go out and actually manifest a partner if a partner was all that's necessary. Like if that's all that's necessary, that's not hard for a woman to manifest. But what's missing is it actually going to be pleasurable for them? And so I'll mention another study where there's this gap, right? Women's willingness to engage in a sexual encounter with someone new, men's willingness to engage, men's willingness is much higher than a woman's. And so that's been known for a long time. And so they started asking question, what is it, what would change that for the women? Like what would change for it? And there was a lot of stuff that came out. It was a really interesting survey, but the two things that stood out the most are if she knows that she's not going to be slut shamed, she knows she's not going to be made like she's not going to be seen bad for having a healthy sexual libido. And she has some reason to think that the sex is actually going to be good for her. So obviously there's this physical component that women often get shortchanged on in sex. Sex tends to be better for men. It's not necessary. You can make the sex be fantastic for women. And often what I end up doing in relationships is orienting their sex to be about her. And suddenly they're getting both of them are getting the thing they wanted. She's getting actual quality attention on her body and her somatic pleasure that has been missing. And he's actually getting the empathetic co-experiencing that he's been hungry for the whole time. And so that's why I say it's almost the opposite. Like the somatic is easy for men, but what they hunger for is the empathetic. And for women, it's easy for them to go to the empathetic and kind of have a vicarious experience. But what's missing for them often is the somatic. Like the sex actually feels good to their body. And so that's kind of my whole spiel about that topic. How does that land when I say, I'm curious how that lands with you when I talk about that stuff. Because you're a woman, I often talk about women, and then I'm super curious, like, tell me if I'm off. Like, you are the arbiter of anything I say about women, about whether it's actually true or not. So
no, I would say you're right on.
Great.
It makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't have thought that before you started talking. I wouldn't have thought that was really more what men were looking for. Because they go about it in such a weird way.
Yeah.
Right. And the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing is alive and well. And it's very true. We're very different. And when we take time to learn about each other and not make each other wrong and just, yes, you're different, but that doesn't make it wrong. I'm different. That doesn't make it wrong. So.
Right. Yeah. And the whole Mars and Venus thing, I think there's a lot of stuff out there that I don't really teach or coach that stuff. It hasn't really rung true. I think men and women are actually more similar than we realize. But there are one or two things that I believe to be true that are just based on my experience of having done this work. So what I think is true is men will come in with a long list of the things they want, right? Right? All the things. But over time, in a committed relationship, in a long-term relationship, there ends up being one thing that's more important to them than anything else, and that is that their partner is happy. So men will throw out, in the long run, they'll throw out all the other things they thought they wanted if they can just have a happy partner. That's the single most important thing that will bring him happiness is that she's happy. And all the other things that he thought he wanted actually spring from that wellspring of having a happy partner. And so this also goes along with what I was saying before about how men want, like, if you look out in the world and kind of the dichotomy of how men's lives have been for, for past 10,000 years and how women's lives have been. And we can see there's a bit of a gap there between how men. So men have it pretty good in ways that they don't really realize. But what they want is actually to be connected with another human being who's happy. And that becomes the most important thing in the long run. And so I often will say that to a guy and he'll be like, you know what? I hate to admit it, but you're right. That's actually true. That's the thing that I want more than all the other things that I've been trying to get her to do. So
you believe that they don't know it, that this is the main thing they want, and they don't even know what it is that they want. They don't even, if they were to realize that, wow.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing in the big picture, and it's the same thing in the bedroom where, I say to guys, because we'll go back to the hypothetical conversation I was describing before, right? And I say, I have to tell the guy a couple things. First of all, I have to tell him everything, like let's say he's a provider and, he's the breadwinner but let's say that he prides himself on being the breadwinner and that he's got all these things these unspoken expectations that just culturally he thought, well, I thought all I needed to do was be a good provider, and that these would be the things that would come to me as a result of that, right? And now they're they're married, they're in a relationship, and they're discovering that that's not the case. And he's like, all I really want from you is that you be happy, and you refuse to be happy. I'm doing all the things that society told me I was supposed to do, and you're failing in the job, like you're impossible to make happy. And so the first thing I have to say to him is, your providing buys you precisely nothing. There is nothing that you are entitled to. In spite of the fact that you have been a good provider, you actually have to listen to the list of things that she's upset about that you are not doing, that, like she's not impossible to make happy. She's not crazy. She's not selfish. She actually has a list of things that she wants from you that you've never been good at, and that you didn't think you would have to be good at, in terms of showing up as an emotionally available, emotionally mature human being, someone who actually connects with her as an equal. There's a whole set of skills that society failed to tell you were going to need in order to have a happy relationship. And you being a moneymaker in this situation doesn't entitle you to any of those things. Actually, some of the things you want from her, she needs from you. And so this can be a heartbreaking moment for him. And the other thing I say to him is, the sex that you've been trying to have, where both of you have been behaving like it's her job to give you sex, and the sex you've been trying to have is actually pretty mediocre. And you may have to put 10 times the amount of attention on her body and what's pleasurable to her than what you've been doing. But what I can promise you is, if you do that, all of a sudden, if you're doing stuff that actually feels good to her, she's going to want a lot more of it. And she's like, yeah, and the sex that you'll be having will be so much better than the sex you've been having up to now. You, the man, will notice the difference, and you will become very highly motivated to pleasure her in ways that you haven't been pleasuring her. That's like, so that these are the kinds of conversations I have with couples.
Okay, so I can't believe I'm actually saying this. I feel like I have to defend men at this point.
Okay.
Because it seems like you're putting 100% of the responsibility and pressure of the relationship. She's not selfish. How do you know she's not selfish?
Sometimes she is. And if she is, I call her out. I say, let's say hypothetically that there's this contract, and the contract is, he says, what would make you happy? She says, this and this and this would make me happy. He delivers that. She actually goes into a state of genuine happiness and graciousness and gratitude that makes both of them happy. When I propose that hypothetical contract, like that's the unspoken contract, in an ideal world, that's what's happening, and both people enjoy that. And they both say, yes, that's what we wish was happening. So once we get that as like, okay, that's what you would like to be happening, where does it break down? And there are lots of places where it breaks down because of her. She doesn't actually know what she wants. She sends him on a wild goose chase saying, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, and he can never win. Is your audience familiar with the concept of a hungry ghost?
I don't believe so, at least not from me there.
Okay. A hungry ghost is where the image is like a skeleton that's eating, but it can't actually, the food just falls through the skeleton. And so it's like there's a hunger that is designed to never be met. It's like they're never gonna, like, this hunger is never gonna get met. So there can be a hungry ghost of something that they didn't get as a kid that now they're, all men are bad and all men are going to fail me in this way, but they're secretly, unbeknownst to them, they're creating the situation that they're complaining about. So there are lots of ways that a man can fail this quote unquote contract. There's lots of ways that women can fail this quote unquote contract. But once we get on the map, we can see, like, he gave you the thing that you asked for, and you aren't actually being gracious. Like, was it something that wasn't actually ever going to make you happy in the first place? Is it that you just can't, like, you're so angry that you can't actually step into happiness? Like, given this contract, your job is to actually find ways for him to win, and when he actually does it, to actually be gratified by the experience. That's the game that you guys have signed up for. So then we can start to say all the places where she's not, like, where does she get stuck? Do you know what I mean? So that also is a thing that happens for sure. Like, you're being mean to him in a way that is beyond what's, like, there's no reason for you to be as mean to him in the way that you're talking to him as you're being right now. Like you actually have to be gracious and be like, you're talking to him like he's going to fail and that he's a piece of shit. And that's, like, I don't think you're crazy. I think there's a core thing that you might be upset about, but he can't fail at everything. Like, we actually have to get to the real thing and solve it. So, like that.
Yeah, it is wild. It really is. I have seen, I had an experience once with an older couple who were the most pleasant people you could imagine. And this was 30 years ago. And they invited me to go to church with them. And I said, sure. And they came and they picked me up in their big fancy car, and I'm in the back seat. And the entire drive, she is just nagging him the entire way. I mean, just, blah, 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 you missed that turn and you didn't do that right. And I'm just like back there going, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. I mean, it's like they forgot I was back there. And she kept doing. And we get to the church, and we get out, and he is just as jovial as if nothing had happened. Like, they were married for 50 years, and he just, all that stuff, all that yuck, somehow it didn't even impact him. That is horrible.
It's horrible. I mean, good for him that he's like, water off a duck. Like, he's figured out a way. But also a shame that whatever was at the root of her anger didn't, like, I go in with the presumption that there's a valid reason, but we need to figure out what the valid reason is. Like, this stalemate where she's just angry and has permission to be angry at him all the time is not I don't. That's not on my list of great relationships.
Yeah, no, and it is amazing that so many relationships are that way, and that they, and I know it goes both ways. I defended men, and I will defend women. Every relationship is unique, and every situation is unique, and you just can't do a blanket statement. However, there are things that are typical, that are more typical of this and that, and so it sounds to me like your belief system in some way is, if a man will lead in the sense of loving his lady with everything he's got, she will always reciprocate in kind, or not always, but mostly. Okay. So what is one of your, and you certainly don't need to give names, but what is one of your favorite memories of someone that you have helped, where they were ready to kill each other practically, and now their life is good?
Oh, one of them that stands out, actually, she did a glowing, just beautiful testimonial. It's on my website, actually, where they had broken up. They were kind of ready to give it another try, but it was very tentative, and they hired me to coach them. And since she's a coach herself, she's a coach, works in the area of helping people build their business. And she had coaches, she had like lots of support. She believed in that kind of thing. So she believed she was hiring me so that her guy could get support because he didn't have anybody. So we start coaching, and this is according to her. I'm actually quoting her. What happened was, mainly what I did for the first chunk of time was coach her on all the ways that she was being, like, all the things, criticizing. She was actively creating the situation she said she didn't want, and she couldn't see it. She's literally, like, all I was doing was telling her what I see. Here's what I see happening between you guys. And all of a sudden, it dawned on her the degree to which she was actively creating the situation she was complaining about. And so that was the first part of that. As that started to change and she started to see him differently and relate with him differently, then they started to focus on, like, all the ways that they're very, very different from each other. And that can be the best thing. It can be the worst thing. It can be the best thing and the worst thing at the same time, right? Like, you don't want someone who's identical to you. You want someone who's different from you. But also, those differences can also be a huge problem. And so I helped them, like, I helped each of them see the other one as a right human being. Like, do you see all these ways that this person are actually good, right? So they started to practice and be able to see, oh no, look how well we match each other. Look how well we have different skills and stuff like that. And really start to appreciate each other's differences. And so then they went through that phase. And then towards the end, I was like, now the big problem that you guys have is you're so polarized to him doing all the things he's good at and you doing all the things that you're good at. You actually start to now pick up some of your partner's skills. Like, it can't always be him just because he's good at it. It can't always be you just because you're good at it. There are times when he needs from you the thing that you rely on him for, and vice versa. So now you actually start to need to be more well-rounded human beings with each other and actually start to pick up the skills that you've been kind of leaving to them to do in this relationship because they're good at it, whether it's an emotional thing, whether it's a cleaning the house thing, whether it's a money thing. Like, you actually need to become more well-rounded human being to get to the next place in your relationship. So that was a beautiful journey that they went on.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about arranged marriages, and quite often they're so much better and they didn't fall in love. It wasn't the right person. They just, they followed the steps and figured it out, and they're happy and they're secure. So that's very cool.
Yeah. So I used to say it's 90%, it's 10% finding the right person and 90% what you create. And it was an exaggeration, but I would just say it to make a point, because sometimes I say exaggerated things just to make. But I found some studies that actually look at long-term relationships and what were the components of making it work well. Turns out, in the long run, it's about 12% who you picked, and the rest of it is what you did with it.
Okay. It does make sense because I think over just people that I've known personally, so many times that a woman leaves and the man is shocked by it. Like he had a much better marriage than she did, and he never saw it coming. So
Yeah.
you explained a lot of why that happens. Ken, thank you so much. Any books?
It's been a pleasure.
Any books or tapes or podcasts or anything that people should listen to who want to improve their relationship?
Ooh, great question. Who am I listening to these days? I love Esther Perel. She's great. I would love to see more men listen to Brene Brown.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.